Welcome to Power Talk with me, Mbuyiseni Ndlozi. Today is, as mentioned earlier, Orientation Day, and I'm with the veteran broadcaster, a sportsman in his own right, and one of the greatest sports in the world, rugby. And coming from what in Europe should be the greatest country if we want to think about it in relation to South Africa, Ireland. And has been on this side of the mic for decades. And today he's on the other side with me on my very first show. The great John Roybee. How are you, John?
I am blushing with pride and also blushing with embarrassment because after that introduction, I'm thinking up to the many mistakes I made on air, to the cock-ups I made on air.
Yeah.
And I'm reminded about rugby and radio where I can say the older I get, the better I was.
Let's start in Ireland. I mentioned and I provoke this because precisely one of the most important things in our country today is somehow a cutoff is slowly happening, that we cut ourselves off from the world. And yet South Africa was possibly the greatest international human rights campaign that drew people across the world. More people participated in it than World War II. Ireland.
What do you want, a history of Ireland?
I want you to present Ireland in 2 minutes in that light. Ireland and the relationship to South Africa.
Well, this is where I'm going to get even more embarrassed. Well, Ireland, of course, was a country that was colonized.
Yes.
They had a brutal past, a violent past.
Colonized by who?
Colonized by the British, of course.
People don't know other white people
Yes.
lived under colonization in their own country.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then, the history is complicated, but it ended up with a series of revolutions.
Yes.
And one that was very unpopular. 1916, they rebelled against British rule. And most of the people, because a lot of Irish people were in the First World War trenches, so they were fighting for supposedly the West, and suddenly their country people rose up and a lot of people were killed and Dublin was wrecked. But then the British decided, unlike the Boer leaders before, they would have a peace with them. They put them up against a wall and shot them.
Yes.
And that led to a complete change of feeling about these people. It also led to a war of independence, a civil war, and then finally a country with one small area in the north left under control of Britain. And that has been the Irish story. But in recent years, this poor country, agricultural country, has, I think, gone up in terms of the economy, the standard of living. It became known as the Celtic Tiger. It was the envy of the world because the economy was flowing. Everybody felt rich. Yeah. Everybody was buying on-plan houses in Bulgaria, expecting to sell them the next year. It went mad. Yeah. It turned out to be a paper tiger, and Ireland is now a very special country with many, many problems as well. But I think that there's a great spirit in the place. There always has been. And they were great. In fact, they were the centre of the anti-apartheid movement.
Yes.
Cada Asmo was a professor at my old university, Trinity College Dublin. And I'm ashamed to say that I came and toured with the British and Irish Lions rugby team in 1980.
Why shame?
Because it was the wrong thing to do. If somebody told me now would I play soccer against Israel, I wouldn't do it. And in those days, a similar type of situation, you had apartheid. I mean, there's apartheid in both countries, I believe. And yet I played rugby and I'm ashamed of it in one way. I'm proud of it in one way because as a rugby achievement, it was terrific. And to go on tour in those days to South Africa was like to be treated like a Premier League football player.
Were you a rugby star?
I was a very good rugby player and I was very, very promising when I was young. And I suffered injury and maybe didn't quite fulfill my promise. But I had a wonderful career, came over here for a year in 1981, and now it's 44 years later. And here we are.
Just that transition. Why leave Ireland, settle in South Africa in 81?
Left, I was fired from my job. I worked for Guinness's as a graduate trainee, a real great career. And then because of the pressure of South African rugby going to South Africa, Guinness were put under huge pressure by Nigeria because they exported a special brew to Nigeria. Guinness is huge in West Africa, and that became under threat. And I had to leave my job with Guinness's, and I didn't enjoy it anyway. I must be honest. And came over here and got offered a job. And I said to my wife, we were newly married, young little baby, and said, would you fancy coming for a year? And there'd been a lot of controversy in Ireland. And obviously, I'd been under a lot of pressure. And I look back on it now quite rightly under pressure. And I decided to go because rugby was my absolute life. And then to get away from that, I thought, what about playing a year? And also, South African rugby was, you could argue now, as the best in the world. Certainly provincial rugby was massive because of isolation.
So you played in the South African teams?
I played for Transvaal for 6 years. I was on the Springboks squad. I played twice for the Springboks, but never got a cap. It's a long story. I won't go into it. And in 1987, I was voted one of the 5 best players in South Africa, which remains one of my proudest achievements. And then I stayed, fell into radio and had 30 years on 702, which I still absolutely love, and retired 8 years ago from radio. And I look back on it now and I can't believe it's gone because it all has gone so quickly.
Rugby in South Africa, and this is my sort of provocation towards radio, was and remains a depository of serious controversy around segregation, integration, and it has been withheld, particularly in the Afrikaner community, as an Afrikaner pride, Springbok and all of that. So you are in this symbolically sort of depository, especially amongst the sort of African community, a depository of racial supremacy, of racial privilege. From there to talk radio, which becomes later on, and I know I just want to make that quick transition by provoking a much more opposite, as it were, effect. Talk radio 702, which became the depository, particularly the time when you facilitated the morning show in the transition, became the opposite, became a wide irritation.
That's a great
irritation of the white establishment to the extent that you became a target of DGOC. Before we go into the technicalities, because it's my orientation day, I gotta get how you thought through these things. I mean, I know they're sort of decades apart, but that's a massive transition from rugby, which was the love of the country, in a time when everybody wanted rugby gone, who was possessed with justice, and radio, and you are on the opposite of every friend of yours. And you did it until you became a target of one of apartheid's most fierce killers.
That's a very, very good question, because in a way that encapsulates what I think I've achieved in this country. I was never a racist. I was never, it simply was never there. But it was South African rugby, and obviously it was a racially divided society. And in your own little way, you tried to make a difference in your own life. But the country was then moving. We could see it. You think back in the 80s, you think back with the boycott campaigns, you think back with the violence, you think back with the towns. It was clear the country was heading to something. And so I played my rugby career and I was single-minded. I wanted to do the best I could. But even within the Afrikaner community, I was known as somebody, my teammates, as somebody who was fairly, shall we say, progressive. Other people might have used a different word in those days. But anyway, when I came near the end of my rugby career, I used to listen to 702 to a genius called John Burks, who was one of the funniest, strangest men I've ever met in my life. And he was a Transvaal rugby supporter with a guy called Kevin Kelly. And occasionally I would phone into the radio station. So to have one of the team phoning in, I became, a little bit of a pet, a recurring caller. And then they phoned me and asked would I like to do morning sports reports. And I came in for 3 mornings a week. I'd get in at 4 o'clock, I'd prepare, and from 6 to 9, I'd do the sports reports.
I see.
Then I'd go and do my job, and then I'd go and do my rugby. So I basically had 3 jobs. And for that, with 702, I got paid the princely sum of 28 Rand a shift. 28 Rand for the whole day of what I'd done. Then, because it became successful, I got invited to do a sports show. And I got invited to become the sports editor. And I loved it. I joined 702 full time. I became the sports editor, and I started a little show on a Saturday afternoon, which still runs, believe it or not. It's called Sports Talk. And as part of the show, we did something that was very unusual in those days. We would ask callers to phone in. South African radio in those days was so controlled. It was so censored.
Yeah.
You know, and we had great discussions about sport, and it was very lively, and it was very, very irreverent, and so on. 702, the radio station, then went under pressure because it was a music station. It was an irreverent, fun station with a very independent news service run by a guy called Chris Gibbons, because we were based in Boput at Tswana. This crazy idea of independent black home. I won't go into that because exactly everybody knows it. So then 702 with a terrible signal, medium wave signal. A guy called Malcolm Russell, a very, very good friend of mine and a terrific radio man, he saw 702 and said, well, the SABC can do that. So they started 5FM, Radio 5 as it was, poached some DJs and basically copied 702 with a far superior signal. So then what happened was 702 decided we have to go talk. A legendary Stan Katz and Rena Broomberg over a bottle of whiskey. One night said, we have to go talk radio. And they did talk radio for a little bit, and it was quite tame. And it was quite soft and music-y and light and everything. And it wasn't working. And the country was heading towards this great either explosion into a bloody racial civil war or into a historic negotiated settlement. And I was doing the talk on, and I was becoming more politically aware. I was growing up, if you like it. And so they said to me, would you like to try a talk show for a week as a trial? And they gave me 10 to midnight, the graveyard shift. And I did a week, and it was fantastic. And we talked about the real issues, the country. We talked about the ANC, the Communist Party, which you could put in jail for even mentioning them. We criticised the government. We mentioned it. It was me in a pub talking to my mates, having an argument like I had a beer. And there was an amazing reaction. And the end result was I was offered this talk show. And my instinct was, this is something special. You're going to live through history now, and you can actually be on the cusp of history.
Within your own province of thought, I mean, from 81 to this moment, when you are now clearly at the cutting edge of experimenting with talk radio on the questions that actually are going to transform the country. What was the state in your head, in your province of thought? Were you fundamentally opposed to apartheid?
Absolutely.
Or was it an evolution?
I was always fundamentally opposed to apartheid. But you had the stories of, bear in mind the Iron Curtain was still there. Russia is after the minerals. Russia is after, there are geopolitical forces at play, and this is the bulwark of Western, all this sort of stuff that was the propaganda part. But as I grew up, and you realized there's an opportunity coming. It's coming. There's an actual opportunity. And every time I went on the radio, it was so exciting. You were building up to this. So, as I say, I got offered the show on the 26th of January 1990, and I did a week show, and it was unbelievable. And I told a lady from Benoni to shut up, and oh my God, that led to rows and ructions. And then a week later, in Cape Town, F.W. de Klerk stood up, and without telling his cabinet, without telling his party, without telling his wife, he announced that Nelson Mandela is being released. The ANC, the PAC, the Communist Party are being unbanned, and we're going to move towards a negotiated settlement. And the whole place went bananas. And there's this little tiny talk show on 702, 10 o'clock to midnight. And it went absolutely, I think we increased our listenership by 3,000% in a very short time. It became the focal point. And the world was looking at South Africa. And I say now, because it sounds immodest, but in fact it was talk radio heaven. because you're living through history. It's a lot different now, a lot harder.
What was your immediate on-air reaction? Did you welcome this this announcement as a bold step forward that must,
of course,
be agitated?
It was wonderful.
As something that must be accepted.
Absolutely. It was wonderful. And yet, so many people now were predicting dire things, terrible things. You're letting this terrorist, communist out. What is he going to say? Oh, this is the end. And of course, you had the right wing planting bombs. You had the AWB, Eugene Blanche falling off his horse and all that sort of stuff. It was absolute chaos. But my conviction, and also, and I've said this to very, very few people. The guilt that I had from enjoying rugby tours, I felt somehow by taking a bit of a stand, it was cathartic. In a way, this is me. And a lot of people can say, keep politics out of sport. We were quite right to go. We played against multiracial. You can justify it that way. But inside, John Roybee, I knew it was wrong. And suddenly here was a chance thrown at me by total chance to at least make a contribution to people living together in a multi-racial, multicultural democracy. And it was an incredible ride. And I look back on it now with far more fear than I did at the time. Because I'm not a religious person, but I almost felt that some of the decisions that were made were being made for me. I almost felt this is a path, this is a way to make a contribution. And I look back in those years now, it was unbelievable. I was interviewed by 158 foreign television companies.
That year?
That year, as it came up. I remember Chris Gibbons kept a note of it. It was 158. I was like this voice. And the funny thing was, and this is why your question was so good, Doc, because you said, how can you've gone from this sort of Irish white rugby player in the heart of Afrikanerdom to being this communist lefty on the air, and people say it's a hell of an achievement. How did you do it? In fact, it was a set of circumstances that played in my favor because, as you know, apartheid put people into pigeonholes.
Yes.
If you were a black person, you probably felt this way. Here's what you are. Indian person, coloured person, or so-called coloured person, as we used to say, and now we get into trouble for saying that. So coloured people, white people, Afrikaans people, you were put into a box. Yeah. And suddenly, here is this loud-mouthed, white,
from Ireland,
Irish,
rugby.
You were
the kwere.
But nobody knew where to put me. A rugby player talking about this, unbanning the, all this sort of thing was unbelievable. And I mean, I'll give you an idea of how ridiculous the situation was. Mandela had just been unbanned. Our show was flying. We were suddenly the absolute highlight. And my producer, Alan Matthews, a former school teacher, and me, a former rugby player, were running this show. So we drove down to Vilakazi Street and we knocked on Mandela's door. Wow. And we said, we were going to ask him to come on the radio show. And the domestic worker opened the door. What's going on? And says, no.
There was no security.
Nothing. He said he's overseas. And this was before the election now, but he was still obviously the main man. So we said, what do we do? So we went into Shell House, the head of the ANC. And it was like something out of a movie. There were hundreds of people sitting there, poor black people who suddenly were at the ANC offices looking for jobs. I seem to remember there were some chickens running around, but it was chaos. And suddenly we were here to do anything. And we thought, look, this is not going to work. And then Murphy Morobi walked past, one of the student leaders and a man for whom I have the greatest respect. And he said, hey, John, what are you doing here? And I said, well, we were hoping to get an interview with Madiba. And he said, I don't think that's possible. He's so... But, and then he said, hang on a second. The Communist Party are having their first legal rally in South Africa for 30 years. How would you like Joe Slovo?
Lovely.
Now, Joe Slovo was the devil incarnate for white people.
Yeah, absolutely.
The communist who was a Russian general and he was
Stalin
planting
himself.
the bombs and this. I said, what? how would you like Joe Slovo? So 10 o'clock to midnight, Joe Slovo rocks up. And he had a friend with him, Raymond Ndlozi, who'd just come off Robben Island.
Get out of here.
So we sat there, little John Roybee, my little producer, Alan Matthews, Ian Crew, the late Ian Crew, you know, sort of gay Zimbabwean, very gay. And the three of us had Joe Slovo and Raymond Ndlozi. And we had, I'll never forget it. It was like you felt not just the whole South Africa, the whole world was listening to that.
Jesus.
And we started off, and I remember the very, very first caller, a lady called Josie Grinrod, phoned in, white collar, and said, Mr. Slovo, welcome home.
Wow.
Thank you for coming back. Let's work together. I've never forgotten it. I can remember the caller that came in. We had 2 hours of radio. Slovo was witty. He was humorous. He took, and because people were phoning in with, you know, slamming him, whatever. He talks in such a positive way. Raymond Ndlozi was unbelievable. He was just such a gentleman.
So they both did.
They both were guests on the program. We did the interview. We took calls in. It was
Where can I get this interview?
Unbelievable.
Denzel, you got to get me this interview.
But anyway,
we're going to air it here. We're going to...
Hold on.
We're going
listen
to broadcast
afterwards.
it
Listen afterwards. Because my show was so famous, we'd been sponsored, the whole show, by Olsen's Beer. And their slogan was the beer for a new generation. Doesn't exist anymore. Olsen's Beer, and we were the show for a new generation. So after this unbelievable 2-hour show, the theme music was playing. That's midnight. And Joe Slovo looks at me and says, I don't suppose there's any chance of having the sponsor's product.
Yeah.
I said, what? And I looked at Alan Matthews, and he looked at me. I said, would you like a drink? He said, oh, that'd be lovely. So we're here in a midnight studio. What do you do? Now, Stan Katz had a bar in his office where he used to entertain, you know, top advertisers. So we shoulder charged the bar and broke open the bar, and we sat drinking with Raymond and he didn't drink, but we said, no, he said, well, I'd love to try champagne. So we broke up a bottle of champagne, which he polished off. Joe Slovo had 7 double whiskies, and we sat here. Ian Crew had his arm around Joe Slovo, telling about the Zimbabwe Broadcasting Association, and Alan Matthews and I looked, talking into the night with Satan, and Satan 2, 2 young people having had this great radio show. And it was unbelievable. I'm ashamed. Well, we left plastered that morning, but I remember coming out of it thinking, you've created history with this radio show. And it still is today. People talk about it. And I realized the power of radio. And I also realized how propaganda can actually paint a picture of people who are totally different.
I see.
And so that was the sort of thing, and it was a regular thing.
You had broken here in that moment of your show years of propaganda. I mean, and the most important thing about, I mean, I know this because I was the head of communications, which would have been called the head of propaganda.
Yes, with the EFF and my friend Julius. Yes, my friend Julius.
The most important thing is you don't really, you target the intellect, but you target the intellect through the corridors of sentiment. People have to feel racist. They have to feel the fear of the rooi gevaar, of the swart gevaar.
I think you're I think you're overanalyzing.
Absolutely no fear. We're having drinks. No one is poisoning no one. Get out of here. South Africa is going to be created.
You're overanalyzing.
Okay.
Because, and I know you're a PhD in. I know you're an academic here. You're overanalyzing.
Okay.
I'm an ordinary guy who I think has got a bit of a conscience, who knew what he was doing was wrong, saw this wonderful opportunity, had the opportunity, the great opportunity, the gift to meet incredible people on all sides.
Yeah.
You know, on all sides. I mean, I had the AWB in the studio as well. I had Barland Stradum, the man who shot the people in Pretoria.
Yes.
I had him in the studio. I had all these people, and I just had this gift. And all I thought was, be honest. Be honest with yourself and give people a chance. Now, I broke every rule in the book. Every single rule in the book. I was rude to people. because I was angry at things where I should have given them a chance to talk. In fact, when I saw Donald Trump talking to Zelensky last night in a funny sort of a way, he reminded myself of me.
He reminded you of yourself.
many years ago. I'm kidding.
But if you'll be patient, John, I'm going to go technical in a moment. But what I'm trying to draw out is the two sort of radical ends sort of your journey. You know, as I said, Springbok, rugby and all of that. Now you're at 702 at the time in which it was anti-establishment. It had to be. You're at the center of that and you become a target. You didn't know maybe, but can you just tell me or walk us through the moment of de Kock's parole? so that I perfectly make this bridge. Now, it's post-South Africa.
Yeah.
Eugene de Kock, they called him
Primeval,
is due for parole. And you get this conversation going on, why shouldn't this guy, and so on and so on. But at some point, you come to discover, and I want you to please walk us through this discovery that, well, you know, at some point we considered you somebody that should be killed.
All right. Well, there was no Twitter and stuff in those days. We got a lot of death threats. We got bomb scares at the station. Wow. I remember many times Casper's outside our house where the police had to come because there'd been
your private home.
I got threats, and my wife and kids got a lot of abuse, and they were little. My kids were little at school then, so it was nasty. I remember. Once there was a very serious death threat. Stan Katz and I were on a death list. If you remember, Johan Haynes, the man was assassinated. We were on the same death. So you felt it was a target, but in a funny sort of a way, you felt, given the stand I'm taking, if I wasn't under threat, I wouldn't be doing my job. So I had that. But then very near the end of my career on 702, Eugene de Kock came up for parole. Now, he was this apartheid killer. Yeah. He did the dirty work in the Bush War in Namibia, Angola, and then he came and was involved in Vlakplaas, where they committed the murders, the political murders and the tortures, and they buried the bodies, and that was basically it. And he came up for parole after 20 years, and he'd gone to jail because he'd gone to the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He'd apparently given full disclosure. He apparently had shown remorse. He apparently had helped the victims' families. In other words, he'd obeyed the rules. And I came on, and I don't know what day it was, but it was towards the end of the show. And I said, here's a great story because it touches on so many emotions, and yet it also backs up against the law. And so I said, look, he sounds like the most terrible man this country has ever seen, cruel beyond belief, etc. But the law says if he obeys A, B, C, D, the newspapers are suggesting he has, even though it's unpalatable, this man should be freed. Now, you can imagine, there's a wonderful talk topic, and people came in, and victims' families phoned in, and this and that and the other. And it was great talk radio. And right at the end, I got phoned up by Professor Pete Krocamp, who was a political professor at RAU Rau. And he said, John, I actually visit Eugene de Kock because I think he was, as an Afrikaner, who was very, very progressive. I think Pete Krocamp was very interested in people who'd gone the other way, shall I put it that way. And so he phoned up and said, I just want to say I visit Eugene in jail. He goes out, he helps families find the remains. You know, they used to burn and throw into rivers in Limpopo. Horrible, horrible stuff after torturing people. And he said, I can just say that those reports about his state of mind and what he's done are true. Something, and I don't know what, made me say, can I meet him? On air, I said, can I meet him? And Pete Krocamp said, I don't think that would be possible. Oh, thanks very much. 9 o'clock, finished the show. Coming up next, nice throw forward. Go into the news. After the show, I got phoned up by Pete Krocamp, who said, would you like to meet Eugene? Wow. And I said, yeah. He said, I've spoken to the prisons people, the NPA. He's going out finding bodies. He's going to be at a tea room in Sandton next Friday. Would you like to come? So I went. I met Eugene de Kock, you know, the rim glasses, stocky figure, like a little bit more scary character. He was eating breakfast, Pete Krocamp, the duck he wears, you know, he's a motorbike guy. And I didn't have to sign anything, get searched. They said, let's go over there and talk the far table. And we walked away. And I've told this story a number of times. And
Did you have a recorder?
No. I wasn't allowed to record it. I wasn't allowed to record it. And so I've got the sort of motorbike academic on one side, and I've got notorious killer on the other. And there's little me from country boy from Ireland. I'm thinking, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
And then de Kock, he sort of sneezed. He went like that, you see. I thought, oh, bless you. And then he sneezed. And then I realised he was laughing. He was chuckling as we're walking away. And I thought, what's going on? By the time we get to the table, he's actually laughing out loud. And I got a little bit I thought, as all these years in jail, has he gone my sugar? Is there something wrong? And Pete says, go on, tell him. So Eugene de Kock put his face up to mine, this far as I'm from the mic, and he said, in the early 90s, I was ordered to assassinate you with a crossbow.
Jesus.
And I went, what? And he said, I was told, and he gave me the name of the police, the two police officers who told him that I was to be killed with a crossbow. And I said, good God, a bit of the hairs on the arm went up. And I said, well, I'm obviously still here. So what happened? He said, I didn't kill people who I disagreed with. I disagreed with many of your views on the radio, but I didn't kill people. I killed people who were planting bombs in the country, were activists, whatever. And I said, well, I'm still alive. He said, well, that's why, because I didn't kill you. And he said, if you hadn't had that view, would I be dead? He said, yes. And I said, would you have killed me with a crossbow? He said, no, you'd have been a victim of crime. Jesus. Which makes me think of some of the crime victims. Then I said to him, how many people did you kill yourself? And he said, including the Bush War, he said between 180 and 200. And we sat down and talked. And I had this terrible man in front of me. And yet my overall reaction was, he'd been brought up by this, country son of a policeman, Swat Ghafar, Roy Ghafar, the armed struggle, the communists, whatever, put down, etc., and doing this stuff. And terrible things. But a bit like Pete Crowcamp, I was thinking, what makes someone like that take that route? What makes some of the white people who were on the other side go that? It's a fascinating thing. And so Eugene then, I said to him, what do you think about F.W. de Klerk getting the Nobel Peace Prize? And all the politicians and the people. And he was absolutely vitriolic against them. Jeez. He said how they could do it and claimed they didn't know what was going on. And he told me a story about Adrian Flock, the Minister of Police. If you remember, he had a bit of a sort of conversion. Yes. And he felt guilty. And he used to wipe the feet, wash the feet of Chikani and these people. And he visited Eugene in jail. And he said, Eugene, we never actually told you to kill all those people. And Eugene de Kock said, no, but you gave me medals for doing it. Jesus. And so he was there, and so I had this, obviously this revulsion at some of the things he'd done. And I asked him about Yapi Maponya, who he'd killed with a spade, and he said yes, but his brother was an activist. We were torturing to find out at the brother, and they'd shot him, and he wasn't dead. So I actually put him out of his misery. I mean, I'm talking to this man, and it was amazing, and in a funny sort of a way. I mean, the fact that I was given these opportunities, these stories, and in a funny sort of a way to make a small contribution, and I'm not maximizing the contribution. Yeah. So many people come up to me now and say, I hated you. I hated you. You were communist. Now I realize you. So many people come up and say, you prepared us for the new South Africa. Yeah. So many people came up and said, you actually allowed both sides. Sometimes I didn't, because sometimes I was, as I say, I made every mistake in the book, and then was lucky enough to come up with a consultant called Ian Grace from Australia, who taught me the basics of radio.
I get it. I mean, you are a sportsman. You tackle. I see the...
Allegedly,
because you are not doing... Well, I mean, sports is very competitive.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like you got to win.
Yeah.
I get the dramatics of the transition from a purely human point of view, and I mean, but these two identities,
you're obsessed with
I
this.
don't know. It's not an obsession,
but it's not actually.
I think South Africa is opening up, to wedge drivers that are taking us back
Here, here.
to those oceans.
Here, here. Driven by fear.
Yeah.
Driven by fear and greed.
And ambition. And
but it's not just South Africa, it's the world.
It is.
The world. You had this globalization that basically said we're one planet and we're going to try and help people and we're going to look after starving people in India and take them out of poverty, which has been an incredible success, by the way. And now suddenly, for whatever reason, I personally have this little theory that it's a combination of social media, the effect of which has changed the world, I think, mostly not in a good way, and the cult of celebrity. The cult of celebrity, where somebody now is famous for being famous. Somebody does something stupid, is famous, and as a result, politicians who used to be boring old people with glasses, and now, no disrespect to the current people I'm talking to, but now you have to have the Boris Johnsons.
Let's do that. How has this world of social media, I mean, this means everybody has the gadget for social influence. They can put out their story out there and so on and so forth. The cult of celebrity and all of that. How has that disrupted radio?
Well, people say...
If it has.
Absolutely. People say talk radio is dead. I mean, radio that entertains is there. Music is there. But obviously there's other things. There's AI. There's, different streaming platforms. But people say talk radio is dead. People say it's dead. It's gone. What's the place? You don't have to sit and listen to the doc on Power FM because I can get the news. I can get this. I can get opinion. I can hear from everybody what they've said. Trouble is, what's true? What's honest? How do you know? I mean, you get a situation where the top medical scientists in the world tell us that COVID is this disease and you must get vaccinated. Somebody on Twitter says it's going to give you autism and you believe who do you believe?
Yes.
You get politicians like Donald Trump telling us that Zelensky caused the war in the Ukraine. He's a politician. People believe him. Who do you believe? And I think the world and South Africa is screaming out for a place to go where you're going to get the facts.
I see.
Delivered in an objective way, an accurate way.
Why
you're
is
going to,
radio
you're going to get, hold on, you're going to get opinion. Sorry, I've taken over the show now. Sorry, man.
I've got a long model. I'm not the breakfast guy. But why is radio the sort of place where something might be more reliable as information than somebody on TV?
No, it isn't. It isn't. But I'm saying it has the opportunity.
I see.
Whether it's radio, whether it's television, whether it's online, whatever. I think the world is now crying out for a place that's credible. And it's a huge job because you've got to start off. And I go back to 702 now. And Chris Gibbons, who I don't think anyone has given credit for what he did on 702 when we were this silly, irreverent, fun, successful music station, and he ran a news team that was straight down the line, that gave the news in a way that was fair, objective, and factual.
Yeah.
And so that's where it starts. It starts with news. Then it starts with people like yourself, who, like me, had this incredible platform to give their opinion, but also to take opinion and also to clarify. To give news, to find out from the people involved. And I'll say it, Doc, you have a massive, massive advantage. Because even you came from the red children and the berries and the
I'm the quintessential Roy
exactly
and mixed in one.
And
what is your advice? You came from rugby, which was the love of the white community.
I know,
and you went to disrupt them.
I know some of the security guards. I know some
faithful to the love.
Listen, Trump, stop talking over me. I know some of the security guards in Parliament remember you. So you have this background, but also, jokes aside, you have the insight into what goes on politically.
Yeah.
Now, you've got a difficult job of persuading people that the theatre of the EFF, and there is theatre, obviously, in politics as well, but that you're no longer wearing that hat, if I can put it. You might have, your own opinions, but you have this massive opportunity. Because most people don't understand how Parliament, how government, how municipalities work. And you have a massive opportunity to tell people. So when something comes out, the GNU, they're at each other's throat, it's on the edge, and you can say, no, it's not. I can tell you no. This is being put out there, etc. Give people an insight. Bring experts on. Tell them the news, bring opinion, look at both sides. But even both sides, there's a thing, I don't know if you've heard of whataboutism.
Yeah.
Whataboutism.
Yeah. It's famous in the Israeli-Palestine argument.
Correct.
Yeah.
The AIDS debate. I remember asking Dr. Helen, I forget her name, the expert in AIDS, to come on the show because President Mbeki was an AIDS denialist, and my old friend, Dr. Mantu Shabalala Msamang, who had a huge fight with once when I asked her, does HIV cause AIDS? And huge row. And I remember inviting the professor on, and she said, no. I said, what? And I said, no, I just want you to come on. She said, no. There comes a stage where what about the other side is actually killing people. The science has said, it is now proved, HIV causes AIDS and other things. And yes, diet is important, but it is now unbelievable. It's true. It's fact. It's gone beyond an opinion. And by inviting me on to refute, you're actually doing damage because people will refute it, etc., and the whole row will go on. So it's a huge responsibility you have. And I'm saying this, and I say it again, and people don't believe me. There is a massive opportunity for a radio station, a talk radio station, provided you obey the rules. Provided you obey the rules and still have fun. Stan Katz used to say the format sets you free.
What are the rules?
Well, there's so many rules. I mean, I'll give you a classic example. You might have an interview with ABC coming up on a radio station. Power News plays and gives you 3 stories. 7 people shot dead in KwaZulu-Natal. There's a bus crash. The budget is going to be announced next week, and Donald Trump has gone mad. That might be the story in the news. Power FM has given me the news. And remember what I'm saying? Your news has to be spot on, objective, honest, well presented, factual. You come out of that and you say, I'm going to speak to so-and-so, Vote Kellerman about winning 3 Grammys. You've come out of the news, which as a listener has told me, this is the story. This is the world today. This is South Africa. This is the world. You're the talk show host whose job is to explain it, to comment on it, to have opinion on it. And you don't even mention it. And you move somewhere else. As a listener, that just sounds like it's such a disconnect. In fact, it sounds stupid. So you've got to work with news. You take a news story, you come out, even if it's a comment. That's an interesting story. I cannot believe that this violence is still happening in KwaZulu-Natal. For goodness sake, where are the police? How many arrests have there actually been? And has the violence gone down? Little comment. Trump, maybe a comment on one of the other ones. Follow news. We'll talk about that. News will be following that story, and we'll get some feedback on it. Now I've got an interview. Good news. Interview with Vote Kellerman. Fantastic. Halfway through your interview with Vote Kellerman, people are tuning in. Who is this guy? He sounds interesting. The doc is talking about who the hell is it? Every so often, we're talking to Grammy Award winning, 3-time Grammy Award winner, Vote Kellerman. Let people know. Halfway through the hour, people are listening, they've turned in. What's going on in the world? This is a great interview with Vote Kellerman. Halfway through, a little news update. The big stories in the news are A, B, C, D. So suddenly, and the format has allowed you to do what you want, have fun, talk to a musician, talk to this. But you're still giving people the current affairs, news and opinion. In half an hour, by simply working on the basics, you've improved your show 100%. And this is what happened with Ian Grace, who is my radio mentor and hero. And 702, because of the unusual circumstances, we made it up as we went along. But because it was this absolute pivotal point in South Africa, we didn't have to follow the rules in order to be hugely successful. It was only then when we became boring, crime, whinge, whitey, whingy, this, that and the other, and then an attempt to be funny and silly and smutty, that we came in and had to learn the basic rules. And the basic rules set you as a host free, because you're doing the rules, which means that the overall plan of the show is coming across, a current affairs news show, and yet my personality within that, as long as I obey those rules, it sets me free to do anything.
I see.
Now, it only took me 30 years to learn that.
Talk us through. You've got events that are driving an interest in talk. You've got Mbuyiseni Ndlozi massacre. You've got
Wow.
Chris Honey's death. You've got, and then suddenly for like maybe 5 months, there are no big events. How do you keep the interest in the show?
By working hard.
Obviously, the rest of the other moments, everybody wants an analysis. Everybody wants the facts. There's a fascination. But then there's a time in life when nothing is happening. How does the show make something happen?
When in South Africa is there nothing happening? I'll give you a classic example to show you what I'm talking about. Out there, we've got the highway, highway from M1 highway. If you're in your show and it's, I don't know, 9:15 and there's a crash out there, the biggest story for many of your listeners is that crash out there. Forget the war in Ukraine, forget Gaza, forget the budget. People are stuck from going to work. They don't know what's happening. They don't know what's there. That's a massive, massive story. There's always stories because the news will always find stories. And the day that you mentioned Chris Hani, the day that you mentioned 9/11, those huge, huge stories, that's the easiest day on talk radio. The show takes care of itself. Take all your preparation, throw it away, because that is the story. That's all people want to know about. What has happened? What is going to happen next? What are the implications? What are people saying? The day that very, very little is happening, that's where you and your producer have to box clever. What's in the news? How do we turn the news into something? How do I take that news story? It might be a drain in Soshanguve that is flowing sewage. That's a massive story, not the fact it's happening. But maybe we can do something about it. Let's do something about it. This is a major problem. Let's test the system. Get in touch with the municipality. Let's get somebody on the line. Let's send a news reporter out there. Let's make a fuss about that and use this as a test case to deal with some of the things that are happening in South Africa. That's a gripping story. The next day, the drain has been fixed, because I guarantee you, if the Tshwane municipality has got Power FM, people breathing down its neck and saying, we are testing you on this one, that is going to be fixed the next day. That's a great story. Maybe that's the day. Whoops, you get your voter Kellerman in. Sorry, I'm getting excited. I hit my microphone. Maybe that's the day you get your voter Kellerman in. Somebody famous. Maybe there's a South African you can get on. But every time you come out of the news, comment. Every quarter of an hour, throw forward to the news what's there with a little comment from you. Every time there's a crash, every time, remember, those people out there regard you as a friend, and a friend tells you what's going on. And I'm getting so excited, I wish I was in your seat.
Okay, 2 last things. Very practical. In my head, radio is first and foremost some voice I fall in love with. And I don't know. But my assumption growing up was, they choose first and foremost, do you have a radio voice?
Totally
is there
wrong.
Such a
totally
thing?
Wrong.
Is there a radio voice?
Totally wrong. The old days, yes. The days of the BBC.
Yes.
The days of the SABC. Yes. That's your radio voice. But somebody once said to me, I remember in the days when I received lots of abuse, and somebody said to me, John Roybee, she said, you've got the worst voice on radio.
Yeah.
She said, every time I hear you speak, it's like somebody who has been pushing a wheelbarrow full of wet sand, has thrown the sand out and has now dragged a spade across it. But let me tell you something else, because I used to get so upset with the insults. Here's the best one ever. And I regret, this is long before the days of sending tweets and messages and SMSs. They used to send you letters. And this letter I wish I'd kept. It said, Dear Mr. Robbie. And I thought, oh, that's very nice. It said, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you. You are a effing, I won't say the word, communist. Every night I dream of pouring petrol on you and setting fire to it, and I'll fall asleep as you scream your way to a horrible death. Right? That was the effort that has gone into that. And it was signed a concerned Christian. But my point is, the criticism can hurt. You get criticism and people, because they think it's their radio station. And if you do something that they don't agree with, and you'll get a lot of criticism for taking somebody else's seat, by the way. And I said to because I'm a sensitive soul underneath this blasé exterior. I'm a sensitive little flower. And I said to Ian Grace, I said, all this criticism. He says, every time you get criticism, you stand up and you celebrate like you've scored a goal. Because he said, if you've got all the people who like you listening to you, you're a good radio host. But imagine if you've got also all the people who hate you listening to you. He said, then you're a great host. So after that, every criticism I got from people who heard something on air, I said, yes, but you're listening to me.
Last one. Is there a radio personality, not like public personality? What you keep saying, bring your personality. Honesty. What is a radio personality?
Honesty. It's you. You are the radio personality. People who put on a show, put on a performance. And I would say the one thing, looking back on my radio career, and I keep saying I made all the mistakes.
Yes.
Don't think I'm some great radio guru I made every mistake in the book, and I look back on some of them and absolutely cringe. But the one thing I can say with total honesty is that what you heard on the radio is what I am. What you hear is what you get.
I can actually attest to that. I met you 30 minutes before and I thought, am I on radio or what?
Well, my wife says, stop interviewing people. Stop interviewing people.
If you were in the Oval Office last night and that situation of heads of state played out, what would have been your intervention?
How do you mean, in what way?
What would you have done? All journalists had the opportunity to ask questions. What would you have chosen to do in that moment?
I think in that moment I would have said, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, please can we hear the President of Ukraine speak? Because he was trying to speak, he was trying to answer, and obviously the Vice President was just trying to make Trump look good and get him to thank Trump and thank America and so on and so on. And Trump was just obnoxious. And the guy, and there's a message there. And again, this is something that was one of my great criticisms. I get so excited.
You would have asked them to not be you.
but I get so I get so excited sometimes. I talk over people, and funnily enough, one of the greatest compliments I've ever had was not on radio, but at a function. And Nelson Mandela was there. And very, very cheekily, I wrote a note. We were 702 and Mnet, tucked away in the corner, all the SABC tables, a media function after he'd become president. And I sent a cheeky little note on the menu and said, Mr. President, we're also media. Can you join us for a while just so we can talk to you? And I said, this is not a long walk to freedom, joke. And he picked it up and he waved at us and we waved, and he came and sat with us for 45 minutes. Jeez. And it was unbelievable. Now, I don't know if you ever met Madiba, but when you met Madiba...
I've never met Madiba.
He had a presence.
I was always with him in the studio. And that presence touched me too.
He had a presence about him that was unbelievable. It was almost religious. The most famous man in the world, he had a presence. And also, he was so much bigger than photographs. He was a big guy. Some guys are the same height and yet other guys appear much bigger. That was Madiba. He came, and everyone at the table, he had this effect that no one could speak to him. So everyone was like this, you see. And of course, I said, I'm not going to waste this opportunity. So I said, now, given it was back in the 90s when there was dreadful violence between the IFP and the ANC. So I said, Mr. President, can I ask you a question? And he said, yes, go ahead. And I said, how is it you'll meet Betsy Verwoerd, you'll meet de Klerk, you'll meet Pick Boerta, you'll meet all these people, and you've never met Chief Buthelezi? Oh, no, let me speak to you here. You see? And he's getting very, and now it's like I'm interviewing. And I admit the finger came out, and I'm saying, now hang on a minute, wait a minute. And he said, now you, shut up. And I was stunned silence. And then he laughed and he said, you are not on the radio now. And that was the greatest compliment ever. So as far as I know, Bill Clinton and John Roybee are the only two people that Madiba is told to shut up.
Yeah.
How's that for a compliment? So
is that what you would have said? Mr. Trump, would you shut up a bit and hear Zelensky? Thank you so much, John. I'm going to embrace everything you said. And,
no, don't just think of it.
The most important thing.
Don't embrace it. Think of it. Think of it. Think of it and make a decision. All right. Okay.
Yes.
But can I wish you the best of luck? And I know underneath your blasé exterior,
I'm very nervous.
You are very, very nervous. And can I tell you, after 30 years on radio, doing my last show on radio, I was more nervous than my first. Like an actor, The minute you lose those butterflies, you're finished. If you don't feel nervous before a show, you're not going to deliver. But I wish you everything of the best. And if you have half the career I had, you're going to have an amazing career.
The great John Roybee. Thank you very much.